Good evening. I am Erica Garcia, the Director of Parent and Family Engagement. I would like to thank all the parents and community members that have joined us in person or virtually. We are here this evening to discuss in detail how this pandemic has affected our district and the financial resources that have recently been made available. COVID-19 has caused major disruption in our instruction as well as social emotional trauma among our students. As parents, we've had to wear multiple hats to keep things afloat at home. To the parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, caretakers who have helped our students from home, I applaud you. I know it has not been easy. It's been a challenging year for everyone. For the next upcoming school year, we are planning on face-to-face instruction and would like to share those plans with you this evening. We have 3 presenters sharing some feedback, giving you some information. We have Mr. John Garlick, Director of Federal Programs, who will be sharing with the ESSER grant, information on the ESSER grant. We have Michael De La Rosa, Executive Director of Risk Management, who will be discussing what our district has been doing and what our district will be doing for next year. We also have Dr. Jocelyn Oakes with us, who will be sharing some information from a medical standpoint. If you have any questions, please wait till after the presentation is over, and we do have a microphone available. For the people that are joining us from home, please input your question on the chat. We are monitoring the chat from home, from our computers, excuse me. We do have a panel available this evening to answer any questions. We have Dr. Priscilla Canales, Superintendent of Schools, Abel Aguilar, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education and Leadership, Dr. Sergio Garcia, Assistant Superintendent for Administration and Support Services, Michael De La Rosa, Executive Director of Risk Management, John Garlick, Director of Federal Programs, Dr. Jocelyn Oakes, Pediatrician, Elias Trevino, Director of Assessment and Accountability, Bilingual ESL. Mr. Trevino will also be translating the meeting for us this evening. Susan Kaufman, District Nurse. In addition to our panel, we have other department heads that are here with us. We have Mr. Neil Garza, Director of Special Education, Martin Rodriguez, Director of Custodial Services, Americo Garza, Director of Energy Management, Andres Sanchez, Assistant Superintendent for Business and Finance, Carlos Martinez, Executive Director of Technology. And before we begin, I would also like to give thanks to the different departments, to KWES, parental involvement, the technology department, to help put this meeting together for everyone. And before we begin, every great team has a great leader. At this time, I would like to invite our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Priscilla Canales, to share a few words.
Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. First of all, welcome to our parents in the audience and to those of you that are online with us this evening. In our district, we believe in the power of teamwork and the power of community. And as we plan this summer for a start to a school year that we're hoping will be very, very different from the one we experienced this year, we are seeking your ideas. We do have a wonderful opportunity to the tune of $63 million coming for our federal government through our state to create the safest possible schools in an age of a pandemic, and to also make sure that we recover and we support our students and our staff in all areas. For our students, learning loss, learning that did not occur because they weren't able to be in front of their teachers. Maybe some emotional supports they need because they've been for too long, we've been away from each other. You know, recently I had the opportunity, because I am vaccinated, to hug my mother. The warmth of my mother's hug, something that I had been yearning for since March 2020, finally happened. So it's been tough on all of us. So thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. On behalf of our Board of Trustees and your entire Wesco ISD family, we're going to have an excellent 2022 school year, and we need your help. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Canales. And our first presenter this evening is Mr. John Garlick.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you in advance to Mr. Trevino for translating. Good evening. My name is John Garlick. I'm the Director of Federal Programs, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the ESSER 3, or American Rescue Plan grant, which we're looking into for taking care of our staff and students in the fall. There are 3 objectives to this grant. One is to have a safe return to in-person and continuity of services. In other words, we want to get our students and our staff safely back into the learning environment which they do the best in. Second, 20% of the funds which we receive, minimum, set aside to assist our students in recovering their learning which they may have lost or not got as much of during the pandemic. And lastly, we want to make sure that when we do these things, they must be one-time purchases, short-term expenditures, and they have to address needs that are identified to either take care of learning loss or staff safety.
So, tenemos 3 objetivos con el propósito de esos fondos federales para poder usar ese dinero para ese propósito. 3 objetivos. Número 1, el plan es regreso seguro a la persona y continuidad de los servicios. Número 2, 20% de esos fondos que vienen a ese distrito son reservados para actividades de pérdida de aprendizaje, porque sabemos que esta pandemia ha causado, ¿verdad?, esa pérdida de aprendizaje. Y tercero, es recomendado para gastos únicos a corto plazo para acordar las necesidades identificadas causadas por la pandemia.
The grant we're speaking of, it is not a competitive grant. The funds are there for us to gain as long as we follow this 4-step process. Number 1, we need to identify what needs we have with all the stakeholders. Number 2, we allocate the funds based on those identified needs. We submit our application, and then we implement the programs to meet those needs. And lastly, we go back and we look at how we did, and we adjust the plan accordingly.
Esos fondos federales no los tenemos que acudir en forma de competencia, sino ese dinero ya ha sido apartado para ese distrito. Tenemos 4 pasos que tenemos que seguir, el proceso de la solicitud. El paso número 1 es identificación de las necesidades con los grupos interesados, la razón por el cual ustedes están aquí esta noche. Paso número 2, asignación de fondos según las necesidades que tengamos en ese distrito. Paso número 3 es enviar la solicitud e implementar los programas. Y a fin, el paso número 4 es evaluar la efectividad de la implementación de estos programas.
To identify all those needs for our safe return to schools, it's going to take the input from a lot of different stakeholders. That includes our school board, our principals, our teachers, other staff members, people in our community, parents, their families, and especially our students. So this is not something that one person or a small group comes up with. That's why we so much need your assistance in identifying those needs.
Para identificar esas necesidades en nuestro distrito, necesitamos consultar con diferentes grupos, como pueden ver en la pantalla. Grupos interesados los podemos nombrar, como la mesa directiva del escolar, directores escolares, maestros, personal, la comunidad. Necesitamos, ¿verdad?, consultar con ustedes como familias, como padres, y especialmente nuestros estudiantes. Queremos identificar esas necesidades a través de estos grupos interesados.
Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, the initial allocation, which is the funds we would receive sometime, looks like it'll be late summer, would initially be $42 million. As the fall goes on, we'll get the last third of the money, which is another $21 million, or a total of $63 million, which we'll be able to use between now and September of 2024 to make our schools safe and keep them safe and meet the learning needs of all our students.
So, ¿de qué estamos hablando aquí? ¿Qué tanto cantidad es? Si pueden ver en la pantalla, la asignación inicial viene a una cantidad de $42 millones, que vendrá más o menos al fin del verano. Entrando al otoño, vamos a recibir la asignación restante, que es una cantidad de $21 millones, que en total suma a $63 millones. El gobierno federal nos ha dado, ¿verdad?, la responsabilidad de asegurar o mantener la seguridad de nuestros estudiantes, las escuelas que estén seguras, y enfocarnos en esa pérdida de aprendizaje en estos 3 años, dando principio el 13 de marzo, que acaba de pasar, hacia el 30 de septiembre el año 2024.
We first received word on these funds 3 weeks ago, and this is the process we've followed so far, starting with meetings to make the department chairs aware of what this grant meant and the principals. Department chairs have been having meetings with the stakeholders they work with to get feedback on things that we might need to do. A survey, which is posted this evening for the next week, to get input and feedback from students, staff, parents, community members. Okay, these are all, and this meeting this evening, these are all things we're doing as far as preparing to get this grant money.
Como pueden ver en la pantalla, tenemos un cronograma, y esto nos ayuda, ¿verdad?, a identificar a ustedes cuál es el proceso que hemos estado tomando. Recibimos palabra de estos fondos hace 3 semanas, y estamos en el proceso de tener juntas, ¿verdad?, departamentales, con líderes de la escuela, del distrito. Ahora en esta noche, ahorita vamos a hablar de eso, por eso están aquí ustedes esta noche. Tenemos aquí este cronograma. Básicamente nos está enseñando la cronología del proceso a llegar a esas necesidades.
We still have plenty of work to do going forward for this grant. This evening we have a meeting, this town hall, to make people aware of exactly what this is and what it means to our community and our students and our staff. After this, we will have 2 DAC meetings. That's the District Advisory Committee meetings, one next week on the 26th and one on the 8th of June. Parents, if you're interested in participating in one of those meetings, please contact the parent involvement specialist at the school for your student, because we want the input from all the people who have a stake in their students. After that, we will prepare, based on the needs assessment we come up with at the DAC meeting, we will come up with the plan, which then we will share at the school board meeting in June on the 14th. Parents and community would be welcome once again to look at it, and still we'll be looking for feedback. After that, we'll do the actual write-up, and we'll submit the plan by the end of June so that we can gain access to those federal funds.
So, tenemos mucho trabajo que hacer aquí hacia el momento, ¿verdad?, que empecemos a recibir esos fondos. Como pueden ver en la pantalla, hoy tenemos esta junta, esta reunión con la familia. Necesitamos, ¿verdad?, sus comentarios, necesitamos que nos den, ¿verdad?, sus pensamientos. Enseguida estaremos teniendo 2 reuniones con la comité que es del distrito. Tendremos juntas con ellos en las siguientes semanas y luego formularemos un plan a través de las necesidades que se llevará a la mesa directiva para aprobación y finalmente en junio, ¿verdad? Queremos presentar esto al Estado para que empecemos a recibir estos fondos.
Anytime federal funding is involved, there are limits on what you're allowed to do with those funds. Some of the things we're allowed to do is based on safety for our students and our staff. Things like ventilation, cleaning, and our HVAC systems. The district has already taken steps to make our classrooms much safer for the return of staff and students. Back on the 12th of March, the school board approved, and we ordered 1,100 classroom-level HEPA filters to help clean the air. So far, 272 of those have been delivered, and they're being posted into classrooms for summer school so we can make sure those classrooms are a safe and learning environment for our students.
Cuando usamos, ¿verdad?, fondos federales, pues tienen, ¿verdad?, su dirección, su instrucción en qué se pueden usar. Y pueden ver aquí en la pantalla que parte de esos fondos se pueden usar con el propósito de mantener nuestras escuelas seguras, tal cosas como sistemas de ventilación, limpieza y HVAC o aire acondicionados, filtración HEPA aprobada. El día 12, de marzo se aprobó por la mesa directiva la compra de 1,100 sistemas de filtración y pueden ver aquí uno aquí al lado y está otro ahí atrás. Hemos recibido ya 272 que se van a estar usando en las escuelas durante el verano. Eso ya los estudiantes que van a venir durante el verano van a estar beneficiando de estos sistemas de filtración.
The funds for those HEPA filters, we can get those funds back from the federal government because they're purchased to support the safe return to schools. We can also use the funding for training on sanitation and safety with the staff and students. We can use it to purchase supplies such as PPE, things to make the classroom safer. We can also use those funds if we want to repair or improve our facilities as regards to environmental hazards to make them safer to avoid disease spread and anything that might endanger our students or our staff.
El dinero los fondos que se han usado para comprar esos sistemas, el gobierno federal nos está permitiendo recobrar ese dinero, ¿verdad? Por esos sistemas que se han comprado. También tenemos la habilidad de usar esos fondos con el propósito de capacitación en iniciativas de saneamiento. Comprar también suministros de saneamiento para reducir la propagación de esas enfermedades infecciosas. También reparaciones, mejoras de las instalaciones para reducir los peligros ambientales.
Other things we've been doing so far as a district, we've purchased hand washing stations, bottle filling stations, and more soap dispensers. Once again, this is to improve sanitation and hygiene in the schools. The ESSER funds can be used to reimburse those purchases, and if we identify a need that we need more of any of those, we can continue to purchase more. Once again, the goal is to maintain the safety of our students and our staff.
Como pueden ver en la pantalla, se han comprado este equipo con el propósito de mantener, ¿verdad?, nuestros estudiantes seguros. Y de nuevo, el gobierno federal nos permite recobrar los fondos que se han usado para comprar este equipo y si encontramos que hay más necesidad de tal equipo, lo podemos hacer.
We've also purchased personal protective equipment and classroom supplies, once again, for hand washing and making things safe in the classroom. These can also be reimbursed. And once again, we can purchase more if we identify that we don't have enough. We can also buy more, once again, to keep the classrooms and the students and staff safe in the fall.
Con esos fondos podemos continuar comprando suministros y PPE o PPE, que viene siendo básicamente equipo de protección personal, ¿verdad? Para el aula o la clase del maestro, suministros que se necesiten. So, lo que se ha comprado ya, podemos recobrar esos fondos, y si hay la necesidad, podemos continuar usando esos fondos para comprar más de esos suministros.
We've also equipped classrooms with student and teacher desk shields. Those can be reimbursed from that ESSER fund, so we can use that money. We can also purchase, if there's any that have been damaged or we identify a need for more, we can also use the funds to purchase more. The whole goal, once again, being to make sure that in the fall, your students can safely return to school, and you can rest assured that we have the equipment and the training and the staff to keep everybody safe.
So, como pueden ver en la pantalla, se han comprado escudos protectivos para los maestros, para los estudiantes, y de nuevo, el gobierno federal nos permite recobrar esos fondos que se han gastado o usado ya con ese propósito, y si encontramos que hay más necesidad para esto, de nuevo, podemos comprar más de este equipo protectivo.
The next major component of the ESSER 3 or ARP grant is learning loss. Once again, we want to recover that learning opportunities that your students may have lost since last March. We can do that by spending money on things like summer school, extended day, after school programs. If we identify a need, we can even extend the school year. We can also spend funds to train our teachers on things like technology integration, reading academies, dyslexia training, or any other high quality professional development they may need to work with your students. We can use the funds for things like tutorials, trying to find ways to creatively reduce class size or small group instruction. We can provide staff retention and recruitment bonuses. We can also do instructional coaching if it's needed. We have to spend a minimum of $12.6 million on these learning loss activities.
Un aspecto principal, ¿verdad?, primordial de esos fondos es enfocarnos en la pérdida del aprendizaje. Tales cosas como aprendizaje durante el verano, el día extendido, programas extracurriculares, extender el año escolar. También podemos usar esos fondos con el propósito de desarrollo o capacitación profesional en integración de tecnología, academias de lectura, capacitación en dislexia, materiales instructivos de alta calidad, pago de tutores, tamaño de clase reducido, menos estudiantes de una clase, instrucción en grupos pequeños, pago para reclutamiento, retención de personal, entrenamiento instructivo. So, lo mínimo que podemos enfocar o apartar con este propósito son $12.6 millones.
During the past year, we've all become much more familiar and capable with technology. It's helped us try to meet those needs of our students, and we can use that as a multiplier and a way to work with our students, and we can use these funds to assist us in that. We can use these funds to purchase more devices, upgrade infrastructure, or provide cabling or wireless access. We can upgrade our libraries to better meet the needs of our students, as well as classroom media systems and learning management systems. Digital tools. Your students, and I'm sure parents, have also had plenty of opportunities to work with a lot of digital tools in the past 15 months. We can purchase those as needed as well.
Como ha sido su experiencia a través de ese año, el uso de tecnología explotó grandemente, ¿verdad?, en nuestras aulas, en sus casas. Esos fondos se pueden usar con el propósito de el mejorar la tecnología, dispositivos, actualizaciones de la infraestructura, cableado que se necesita para hacer más conexión, mejorar la actualización, ¿verdad?, de las bibliotecas, sistemas multimedia para las clases, sistema de gestión de aprendizaje y también herramientas digitales. Se pueden usar esos fondos con este propósito.
Continuing with the technology, we can use the funds to purchase more and perhaps better educational applications to use for learning. We can provide additional training for our staff in ways to better integrate technology into their lessons and into their classrooms. And we can use that technology to upgrade security to make sure that the information of our staff and students remains safe.
Continuando con la tecnología, podemos también comprar, ¿verdad?, aplicaciones educativas, la capacitación del personal o el desarrollo del personal y también actualizaciones de seguridad. Asegurar, ¿verdad?, de que nuestra tecnología esté protegida y esté segura.
Once again, the real key to all of this is identifying all of the needs that we can to make sure we address them. To help us do that, we have a survey posted on the WISD website. On that survey, and I encourage not only parents, but your students, if you have friends or family in the community, people who own businesses, the survey should take you between 5 and 10 minutes just to give us some feedback. In addition to the questions we asked, there's some space for you to, if you have other ideas, please provide them, because we'll be looking at over the next couple weeks as we come up with our plan to get students safely back into schools, and our plan to make up for any learning loss they might have incurred.
So, la clave en todo esto, necesitamos sus pensamientos, ¿verdad? Necesitamos sus opiniones, sus comentarios. Se ha desarrollado este mismo día una encuesta y está en nuestro sitio de web del Distrito Escolar. Y esa misma noche también tienen oportunidad de hacer preguntas y comentarios. Pero es importante, necesitamos sus pensamientos, sus comentarios. No porque estamos aquí nosotros sabemos todo lo que es de la educación, necesitamos también sus pensamientos. So, por favor, siéntese seguro y en paz de compartir esos pensamientos con nosotros. So, está una encuesta en el distrito, en nuestro sitio del Distrito Escolar.
At this time, before I turn it over to our next presenter, does anyone have any questions on the specifics of the grant itself? How it works or the funding or things like that. If you do, I welcome you to come down to the microphone and we'll take any questions on that. In addition, if we have any in the chat, I'll try to answer those before I turn it over to Mr. De La Rosa.
So, queremos abrir, ¿verdad?, ese micrófono. Si tiene una pregunta o comentario a lo que hemos hablado a través de esta presentación.
How is it determined what schools get the HEPA filters during the summer?
The HEPA filters are being distributed to all schools for every classroom that is going to be teaching summer school. We had the principals submit a list of all the rooms they're planning to use, and the first 272 filters which have already come in, those filtration systems have already started to be delivered so that those classrooms will have filters in the summer. As the summer goes on, the remainder of that order of 1,100 filters, as they're delivered, we'll be putting those into the other classrooms so that we're full up ready for the fall.
So, la pregunta es, ¿cómo determinaron o cómo van a hacer la determinación? ¿Dónde van a ir esos sistemas de filtración? Los 272 que ya hemos recibido ya están otorgados con las escuelas de verano. Y tenemos más información si quieren saber más sobre esto, pero se van a compartir, ¿verdad?, en todas las escuelas. No va a haber escuela que no va a tener estos sistemas de filtración.
Will all elementary schools have enough hand washing stations and water fountains to accommodate the entire school?
That's part of the needs assessment process. We're looking at that to make sure we have enough Right now, we've deployed the ones that we have, and if we identify that we need more, we will be bringing in more over the summer. But that's where we need the input from staff, students, and parents on what we have. Is it meeting the needs of our staff and students? And if it's not meeting those needs, that's where we will go ahead and get more to place them, so by fall. But we do have enough to make sure we meet the needs of summer school already in place.
So la pregunta es, ¿tenemos suficientes estaciones para que los estudiantes se puedan lavar las manos? Y esto es parte del plan, continuar, ¿verdad?, enfocándonos en las necesidades que hay en esto, pero podemos asegurar que en las escuelas de verano sí tenemos suficientes estaciones.
A common question in the chat is, will masks be recommended or required for students in the fall?
As of June 4th, we can no longer require them, but we also cannot say you cannot wear a mask. So we encourage you, if you feel comfortable with a mask, you may continue to wear the mask. I realize that depending on your vaccination status or maybe the health status of somebody at your home, that may be a question. But we cannot require them due to the governor's proclamation after 4 June. But that doesn't say you can't wear them. You're still welcome to do so.
So la pregunta es, ¿se van a requerir, entrando el año nuevo, se van a requerir las coberturas faciales del día 4 de junio hacia adelante? No podemos nosotros ya requerir que se usen las coberturas faciales. Eso no quiere decir que no pueden usar las coberturas faciales, nomás que no podemos requerir. Y eso es parte, ¿verdad?, de un edicto que dio el gobernador Abbott hace 2 días.
Will we have the option to keep students home during remote learning?
At this time, we're preparing for the safe return of students in the fall. We do not know as a staff what's going to happen between now and August. The state has not come out and said directly everyone must be in a classroom in the fall. We're still waiting to see what that guidance is. Right now, we follow the guidance from TEA and CDC as we make our decisions. So at this time, I don't have a positive final count on that, but looking towards the future, I suspect that may be coming.
So la pregunta fue, ¿se va a requerir que todo estudiante esté cara a cara en la escuela? Estamos planeando con ese propósito. Claro, no sabemos qué va a acontecer de aquí hacia el principio del año, pero sí estamos preparando con ese propósito, siempre y cuando la prioridad es la seguridad de nuestros estudiantes, nuestros empleados, y estamos siguiendo los protocolos del CDC, ¿verdad?, y la dirección del gobierno.
Since younger students or kids cannot get vaccinated, how will that work for them, and how will they be isolated from older students? Yeah.
I think if I may defer the health questions for a later presenter on the health questions. I'll answer the questions on the grant, but I'll defer on those.
Okay. So la pregunta está enfocada en los estudiantes que tienen menos de 12 años, ¿verdad? Sobre las vacunas, ¿cómo vamos a asegurar, verdad, su seguridad? Y como dijo el director Garlick, vamos a permitir más tarde en la presentación que se enfoquen en esa pregunta.
Will the expense report be open records to make sure that money that was awarded goes towards what it was for?
Everything we do is auditable and is subject to public information. We don't do anything behind closed doors. We're going to publish our plan, and each year we will present, this is how we spent the money, whatever funds we spend, and we do that with all of our programs, not just the ESSER grant. You know, we want to maintain transparency, because after all, that is taxpayer money, and we want to use it properly and wisely.
So la pregunta era, ¿vamos a ser transparentes en el uso de este dinero? Claro que sí, ¿verdad? Bajo el gobierno federal, claro, tenemos que, todo es transparente, esa es información que es pública, eso es transparente, claro que sí.
Is online learning still an option for parents next year?
At this time, I cannot say definitively what process will be in place in the fall. Once again, we await further guidance from the Texas Education Agency and the CDC. As I mentioned earlier, I do suspect the trend is towards in-class, face-to-face instruction.
So, la pregunta es, ¿habrá la oportunidad de aprendizaje virtualmente en el otoño? No podemos contestar esa pregunta en este momento porque no sabemos, ¿verdad?, los acontecimientos de aquí a agosto, pero ahorita podemos ver que hay un empuje hacia el aprendizaje cara a cara.
Will WISD mandate the COVID vaccine in order for students aged 12 and older to participate in sports or extracurricular activities?
Instead of me making an opinion, let me defer on that. That's a health question for one of our later presenters, instead of me just giving my opinion.
So, la pregunta es, ¿se va a requerir la vacuna? Y básicamente la respuesta es que vamos a contestar o vamos a permitir, ¿verdad?, que aquellos que están encargados de la salud, que ellos contesten eso aún más, más tarde en esa presentación.
Okay, are there any other questions that pertain to the grant specifics that anybody in the audience may have?
¿Habrá una pregunta, comentario a lo que hemos hablado en la pantalla?
Okay, it's time.
Mr. Garlic, we have a Spanish question. Ruth here.
Oh.
Okay, so I will ask the question in Spanish so we can hear it for the parent. 1 second, I lost the question. Okay, in Spanish is ¿cuántos estudiantes van a permitir estar en una clase? Which translates to how many students will be permitted in one classroom?
Right now, we are following the CDC guidelines as far as the spacing, the amount of distance between students, and we are going to continue to do that. So it's going to depend on the size of the classroom when we come back to school in the fall. We're going to follow the CDC gives very definitive guidelines, and we're going to strive to meet those.
So, estamos siguiendo los protocolos del CDC, básicamente, y vamos a continuar siguiendo los protocolos en cuanto a qué tantos estudiantes pueden estar en un salón o aula a la misma vez. Vamos a continuar siguiendo esos protocolos.
It's not a specific number because classrooms are different sizes.
No es un número específico, simplemente porque las aulas son de diferentes tamaños.
Okay, at this time, was there another question?
No more questions.
At this time, I'll be followed by Mr. Michael De La Rosa, our Executive Director of Risk Management. Thank you.
So, ahora presentamos a Michael De La Rosa, él es el director ejecutivo de gestión de riesgos y beneficios para los empleados.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon, and thank you to all the parents and students that are joining us online. My name is Michael De La Rosa. I'm the Executive Director of Employee Benefits and Risk Management. So I've been part of the team that's been working on the COVID response throughout the district over the past almost a year and a half. So basically what we're looking at here is I'm going to talk a little bit about school safety, where we are, here we go. School safety, where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
So, el enfoque de esta parte de la presentación es hablar de la seguridad escolar, dónde estábamos, dónde estamos, dónde iremos y dónde vamos.
Okay. Trying to get this on my, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we were back in March of 2020. And this is a little timeline, just a kind of a little trip down memory lane, if you will. So back in March 13th of 2020, Governor Greg Abbott declares that the new coronavirus is a statewide public health disaster. So that was almost right before or during spring break. That's when all this, started to bubble over. Cases in the news about increased infections, and nobody really knew what COVID was or what it did. So there was a lot of fear there, and rightfully so. Again, and moving back to March 19th, Governor Abbott issued an executive order that limited social gatherings to groups of no more than 10 people, shut down all the restaurants, bars, while still allowing takeout, closes gyms, closes nursing homes, except for critical care, and temporarily closed school. And that executive order ran through April 3rd.
So, tenemos aquí una cronología de dónde estábamos. El día 13 de marzo, se pueden recordar el año pasado, de 2020, el gobernador Abbott declara que el nuevo coronavirus es un desastre de salud pública en todo el estado, y dice que Texas está a punto de poder aumentar significativamente su capacidad de prueba. El día 19 de marzo de 2020, el gobernador Greg Abbott emite una orden ejecutiva que limita las reuniones sociales a no más de 10 personas.
So fast forward to April 17th of 2020, the governor announced that, we got ahead of ourselves here. Why is mine? Okay. Oh. It's technical difficulties here. All right, so I'll just look it up here instead of looking at my screen. So in April 17th, the governor announced that businesses will start to reopen, but schools will remain closed for the rest of the year. Fast forward to June 18th of 2020, Governor Abbott told state lawmakers that students will be returning to public schools for in-person in the fall, and the transition plans that the district had needed to be submitted to TEA. Fast forward to August, Governor Abbott stressed that only local school boards, not local governments, have the power to decide how to open schools during the fall for the pandemic. And what that meant was, when the governor said that we're going to open schools in the fall, some local jurisdictions decided to, try to override the governor and say, no, we're still staying home. But eventually that decision went to the local school boards.
So, el día 17 de abril del 2020, el gobernador Abbott anuncia la reapertura de empresas y cierra las escuelas por el resto del año. El día 18 de junio, el gobernador Greg Abbott les dice a los legisladores estatales que los estudiantes regresarán a las escuelas públicas en persona este otoño o el 2020, planes de transición enviados a TEA. Y finalmente, el día 14 de agosto de 2020, el gobernador Greg Abbott enfatiza que solo las mesas directivas escolares locales, no los gobiernos locales, tienen el poder de decidir cómo abrir las escuelas este otoño durante la pandemia de coronavirus.
So that's kind of where we were back in early March of 2020. So staff was working throughout the school year when we came back March, April, May, June, July, and August. So we were working feverishly with the intent that there was going to be full face-to-face instruction back in the fall. And the first campuses that were open to students for instruction was actually in early October. So during the summer, while this was going on, I'm sure everybody remembers, there was numerous workshops, parent meetings, videos, flyers, advertisement, action plans were created to address COVID safety. And the picture that's on the screen here is actually our back to school action plan, which is public. It's available for everybody to look and study. And we stress the strict adherence to it, and we've been very successful with it.
So, con la guianza del gobierno, ¿verdad? Estuvimos enfocados, trabajamos arduamente para asegurar abrir las escuelas en persona. Y la primera escuela, ¿verdad? O el primer tiempo que se abrió, la primera escuela fue al principios de octubre. En aquel tiempo, ¿verdad? Se crearon numerosos talleres, reuniones de padres, videos, folletos, como pueden ver en la pantalla, anuncios y planes de acción para enfatizar la seguridad de COVID.
So throughout the summer, we worked on this guidance, and again, it addresses student and staff safety. So student and staff protocols. I did see some questions on the chat. What's going to happen if a student is exposed or is positive, and all of that information, all of those procedures, is in this back to school action plan. But I'm just going to touch very briefly on some of the items that are in here. As far as student and staff safety, the most important thing that we stress for both student and staff safety, even today during this pandemic, is that please, if your child is exhibiting symptoms of COVID, please keep them at home. That is the best way to keep our students and staff safe.
Una defensa, ¿verdad?, principal o primordial, que si su hijo está, ¿verdad?, enseñando síntomas del COVID, lo mejor que podemos hacer es asegurar de que se queden en casa, ¿verdad?, para no propagar esa enfermedad.
So moving along, the isolation protocols are outlined in this guidance, and that basically outlines what we do if a student is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19. It lays everything out step by step what the process is. It addresses face coverings. There's a lot of questions about that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in our presentation. But back in the summer, of course, face coverings were mandated as per CDC guidance, and the governor's executive order. Campus visitors protocol, our limits to campus are very, very limited. Those of you that take your kids to school know that if you have to go and conduct business at our school district, you're not going to get very much farther than the front office area.
So, en ese mismo folleto o plan de acción va a encontrar, ¿verdad?, protocolos de aislamiento. ¿Qué haremos cuando nuestros hijos sí están enfermos o nosotros? ¿Qué tenemos que hacer? Coberturas faciales, ¿verdad?, se requirieron en el verano del año pasado. También en ese plan de acción hablamos sobre cómo administramos los visitantes a la escuela. Si ustedes que han experimentado ir a la escuela, es muy diferente, ¿verdad?, a lo que estábamos impuestos en los años antes.
Also part of this, we stress very heavily disinfecting and hand sanitation. As Mr. Garlick mentioned, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on hand washing stations, antibacterial stations, so we have plenty of that. Our classroom disinfecting procedures are also listed here, and also how classrooms are spaced out. So at the time this was written, the safe space for the CDC guidelines or recommendations was 6 feet apart. So the number of classrooms that are number of students that are allowed in a classroom are based on specific measurements for each classroom for students being able to be 6 feet apart.
En ese mismo plan de acción va a encontrar información sobre desinfección general, desinfección de manos, limpieza, desinfección de las escuelas, de las aulas, y también los ambientes de trabajo y aprendizaje, bajo los protocolos de CDC que están apuntados aquí en este plan de acción. Básicamente en ese tiempo era 6 pies de distancia.
So again, there's a lot of information in this booklet. It is online, and some of the questions that I saw coming through with the chats, those answers can be found here. So with that, I'm going to move on.
So, muchas de sus preguntas se pueden contestar a través de ese plan de acción. So, tomen el tiempo de adquirir este plan de acción para poder entender, ¿verdad? Si tienen preguntas sobre eso.
So that's kind of a little bit of where we are, and a lot of those safety precautions are still in place today. Where we are now, there have been some changes since we put out that guidance. In fact, the latest update to that was April 28th of this year. And a couple of the new things that are coming out as far as teacher-student groupings, and I knew this question came out. So again, TEA changed the guidelines that allow for students to be 3 feet apart, not 6. And they specifically state elementary students 3 feet apart, not 6. Middle school and high schools as of now are still 6 feet apart.
So, en guianza más recientemente de la Agencia de la Educación de Texas, han recomendado, o más bien la guianza es de que los estudiantes en las escuelas primarias se les permite que estén a una distancia de 3 pies. En las escuelas secundarias, la escuela preparatoria, todavía se requiere, ¿verdad?, esos distancia de 6 pies apartados.
So a couple of the other new changes, and there was a question about what happens if individuals were known close contact who tested positive. So back in the early fall, when a student or a staff member tested positive, we would do what's called contact tracing. And contact tracing is a process where on the campus, it's the nursing staff does the contact tracing and determines which students were in known close contact with the positive student or employee. And then in those circumstances, those students are identified and sent home. And back in the early fall, the quarantine was 14 days. So CDC did change those guidelines. So now it's only 10 days, and after 7 days if you come back with a negative result.
So, al principio de ese año, ¿verdad? La recomendación era que si un estudiante estaba enfermo con COVID, se le requería que estuvieran en casa, ¿verdad? 14 días, y teníamos que asegurar de que estábamos buscando todo estudiante que tuvo contacto con ese estudiante. La nueva guianza es ahora 10 días, y el estudiante puede regresar después de 7 días ya cuando reciba resultados negativos del examen.
So again, a quick other CDC guidance as of March 8th. So before, anyone who came in known close contact would have to quarantine. Now, if you're this was back in, and I'm going to explain a little bit later why I'm barely coming to this. Individuals who are vaccinated do not have to quarantine if they're in known close contact.
So, si un estudiante, una persona tiene contacto con una persona que está positivo para el COVID, la recomendación ahora, ¿verdad? La guianza es de que si están vacunados por completo, no necesitan entrar, ¿verdad?, a ese aislamiento.
And again, I'm just touching on a little bit of the additional disinfecting and cleaning that we do. So again, frequent cleaning and disinfection do support a healthy campus and a healthy work environment. And I'd like to really, really give a shout out to all of our custodians, our custodial department. They've been training and they've been working extremely hard to make sure that, you know, our campuses and offices are safe and spick and span. In fact, it's probably, you know, the cleanest place to be, actually. So a good shout out to our custodial department.
So, tenemos mucha información acá arriba, ¿verdad?, de lo que se ha estado haciendo para asegurar un ambiente seguro, y queremos, ¿verdad?, honrar a todos los empleados de la conserjería, ¿verdad?, que están haciendo un trabajo arduamente para asegurar de que las escuelas, las clases, todo esté limpio para que sus hijos estén seguros.
Okay, a little still about school safety, where we are right now. So in December, vaccinations started to be available for for individuals over the age of 65. So in March of this year, clinics were offered to staff in conjunction with the City of Wesco and the Hidalgo County Precinct 1 and the Hidalgo County Health and Human Services. So at first, it was a very, very slow trickle of vaccines becoming available. So as time went on, more and more and more vaccines were being made available to us. We did hold an on-site clinic at Cuellar Middle School for employees only. So now the vaccine is readily available to basically anybody who wants it. And we estimate that anywhere from 75 to 80% of Wesco ISD staff have been vaccinated. And even in more good news, again, just recently, Pfizer is now approved for adolescents 12 and over.
Si pueden recordar, las vacunas comenzaron en diciembre para personas mayores de 65 años. En marzo de 2020, en nuestro distrito, trabajando, ¿verdad?, con el condado, con la ciudad de Weslaco, se ofrecieron clínicas al personal del distrito. Se realizó una clínica en sitio en la escuela secundaria Cuellar, y en ese momento nos encontramos que la vacuna está disponible para toda persona que desea la vacuna, y el Pfizer está ahora aprobada para adolescentes de 12 años o mayores.
So this is just a little bit of data of where we're at right now, kind of where we're our students. So as far as our employee cases, since staff started coming back to work in June of 2020, we've roughly approximately 252 positive cases since June of 20. As you can see, it's been it increased, and then it comes down throughout the months, and then you can see we hit a high point at the end of December. And as vaccinations became available to our staff, you can see that the cases have significantly dropped in February to 21, March 8, April 4, and then in May, as of recently, we have 2 active staff cases with COVID.
Como pueden ver aquí en esta gráfica, demuestra, ¿verdad?, la cantidad de empleados, ¿verdad?, con casos positivos de COVID. Pueden ver, da principio en junio del 2020. Pueden ver que ha subido, bajado, subió a una cantidad de 57 en una vez y ha bajado. Ahorita estamos en este mes de mayo, tenemos solamente 2 casos de COVID positivo.
So students started coming back to campus in November of 2020. All staff returned, which was, when you see these numbers here, these are basically ancillary staff and other administrative staff. Teachers were not back on campus until October. So as you see here in November, when kids started to come back to campus, we started off with 8 cases, and then again, still very, very low. The number above it in November, this is the average on-site or in-person enrollment for the month of November, was just a little over 1,300 students. And as you can see, a month it went down a little bit to just a little over 1,000. And then in January, it dropped down to 718. This is average attendance face-to-face for the month. And you can see since February, it's gone significantly up from 778 in January. Can't see that from here. 1,300, 2,500, 27, and then finally right now we're at 3,305 for the month of May.
So, lo que pueden ver en esa gráfica, en lo que está en color azul, eso significa la asistencia promedia cotidiana, todos los días, ¿verdad? Es una promedia. Pueden ver que en octubre 280 era la asistencia, y pueden ver a través del año, a través de los meses, ha subido hasta este momento 3,305 estudiantes. Y pueden ver lo que está en color anaranjado, eso significa los casos positivos de estudiantes. So, pueden ver que ha sido mínimo.
So I'd like to point out the correlation here. As you can see, we hit our peak for employee positive cases in December with 57. And then as you can see, we hit a lower average of student attendance in person also after December. So you can see the correlation is as these cases go down between of our staff, you can see that attendance has been increasing throughout the months. So that has a lot to do, and that's a shout out to, again, to all of our staff for following our safety protocols, our custodians, our parents, for taking great care of their kids. And that is a positive thing for learning in our classrooms.
So, lo más importante que podemos notar es que al bajar la cantidad de casos positivos de COVID en los empleados, podemos ver que en el mes de diciembre bajó hacia el momento que estamos, y podemos ver que la asistencia continúa subiendo.
So that's kind of where we're at right now, where we're going with this. So I know there's been some questions as far as, will everybody be coming back face to face? There is no formal guidance as of yet from TEA or the CDC. However, all the signs indicate that we will be back full face to face in the fall. Again, if you just look on some of the bullet points here, on May 18th, Governor Abbott issued an executive order prohibiting the wearing of masks in schools. This is going to be effective for schools in June 4th. We have a wide access to vaccinations. As Mr. Garlick mentioned earlier, we did purchase large industrial size HEPA filters or air scrubbers for all of our classrooms. And if y'all want to take a look at them, we have 2 in the back of this room. Again, there's been a very, very steady decline in cases. There's been increased immunity that's been building. And I'm not going to steal any of Dr. Oaks' thunder, but she will explain that children are less susceptible to this virus than older adults. And according to the CDC, a substantial portion of the population of Hidalgo County has been vaccinated. So as of a couple days ago, it was approximately at 48%. So of a county that big, we're really moving in the right direction.
Sí, bien, todavía no hay ninguna guía formal de parte de la Agencia de Educación de Texas. Todas las señales, aún en eso, todas las señales indican instrucción en persona, cara a cara, completo en el otoño. El día 18 de mayo, el gobernador Greg Abbott prohíbe los mandatos de máscaras o coberturas faciales de parte del gobierno local, de parte de las escuelas, del día 4 de junio hacia adelante. Hay un grande acceso a las vacunas y como dijo nuestro señor de la Rosa aquí, ahí pueden ver, ¿verdad? Esos sistemas de filtración los tenemos aquí, ¿verdad? Para que ustedes puedan observar. Y según el CDC, este comité del gobierno federal, una cantidad sustancial de la población del condado de Hidalgo ha sido vacunada, que es una cantidad de 48%.
So that concludes my presentation on safety, where we're going, and I guess can open up for a couple questions now.
Esto concluye esta parte de la presentación y no sé si tienen preguntas.
A common question on the chat is, since funds are meant for a safe return to school, how will the school safely accommodate students in the classroom? How will students be accommodated in the classroom?
Well, again, if you're as of right now, today, the guidance is 3 feet apart for elementary and 6 in middle school and high school. So again, all classrooms have desk shields. Teachers have desk shields right now. As of right now, we're still requiring masks. However, that's going to end as of June 4th. So right now we're looking at basically hand sanitizing, proper hand washing, desk shields, and appropriate social distancing.
So, la pregunta se enfoca esencialmente cómo vamos a asegurar la seguridad de nuestros estudiantes en la clase. Estamos siguiendo los protocolos, ¿verdad? En las escuelas primarias son 3 pies de separación, escuelas secundarias preparatorias son 6 pies de separación. Los escudos de los escritorios todavía estarán en uso. Estamos asegurando de que haya suficientes estaciones para que los estudiantes se puedan lavar las manos y mantener esa seguridad.
How will students social distance on school buses? And will there be more buses available to accommodate for the social distancing recommendations?
The guidance on the buses is for social distancing. What we do now is we skip every other seat, and we do allow pods or members of the same family to sit together in the same bus. But realistically, if we had 18,000 students tomorrow, we would have to, the CDC guidance and TA guidance, there is no restrictions on school buses. But what we're planning to do and what I'm recommending for the ESSER grant is for the installation of HEPA filters in our buses. That's what's going to be my part of recommendation for transportation, as well as keeping the windows down. Open windows is also a very good deterrent to spread the virus. But to be honest and transparent, if we picked up a full load of students on a bus, we're not going to leave anybody behind on a corner. So again, guidance is we're doing the best we can on that.
So, esencialmente la pregunta era cómo vamos a asegurar, ¿verdad?, la seguridad de los estudiantes en los autobuses. Y ahorita lo que estamos siguiendo, se sientan los estudiantes en un asiento y luego, ¿verdad?, brincamos un asiento y luego nos vamos al otro. Sí se permiten miembros de la misma familia que se sienten juntos. La guianza ahorita o los protocolos, simplemente no hay restricción en qué tantos estudiantes se pueden sentar ahí. Claro, ¿verdad? Ahorita la asistencia es mínima comparado a los 18,000. El señor de la Rosa está recomendando de que tipos o sistemas de filtración, o más bien ya filtros de HEPA se pongan en los autobuses. También abrir las ventanas para que pueda, ¿verdad?, el aire fluir a través del autobús.
I have a Spanish question, and this pertains to the action plan. I will say it in Spanish. Okay, so los planes de acción protocolos van a estar publicadas y renovadas cada mes.
Oh, I didn't want to steal your thunder, Dr. Oaks, but go ahead.
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Oaks. I guess as a follow-up to the question regarding school buses, right, and classroom size and all of that and how it's going to work in August, right, when everything's going to be open and the masks are going to be gone, right? I think I'm summarizing all the questions. I think the bigger, from my perspective, the bigger issue, I think, for kids. I'm gonna, on my lecture, I'll emphasize how it's mild in kids, right? But my perspective on that, how everything's gonna be open and the buses are not enough and the classrooms are not gonna have enough room for 3 feet distancing, my answer to that would be, if you have a high-risk person in your household, make sure they're vaccinated. Because, and that really is the best solution to this question. I mean, I know I'm not answering the physical aspects of the question, and it's not possible, it's not gonna be possible to have that much room. Anyway, I don't know how many more buses you can add to shuttle 18,000 students, right? And then if you had however many people, 40 students per classroom, I don't know how many more buildings you can build. So my suggestion would be, make sure you get the vaccine at that point if you have a high risk in your household. The other thing, is that 12 and over, if you feel that strongly about your child, you don't feel safe putting them in this environment, then my suggestion is vaccinate them. That would be my suggestion. And that's the best action I can offer, I guess, from my perspective.
So, la pediatra Dr. Oaks hace la sugerencia, esencialmente un resumen, de que si hay mucha mortificación, ¿verdad?, o preocupación alrededor de que haya muchos estudiantes en una clase, en el autobús, tales cosas, si hay alguien en su familia de alto riesgo, ¿verdad?, a este virus, esencialmente la doctora está recomendando que se vacune la persona. Y si está mortificado también de sus hijos, los estudiantes también, ¿verdad?, recomiendan que se vacunen.
Ruth, can you repeat the question? Ruth,
Okay.
what was your question?
Yes, this pertains to the action plan, and the question was in Spanish. It's, los planes de acciones de protocolos van a ser publicadas y renovadas cada mes.
They will be updated as soon as we receive new guidance from TEA, the Texas Education Agency, and CDC guidance. So as of now, both agencies are in the process of updating their guidance. So when we get their updates, we will update our action plan, and we update it as we get updates.
So, simplemente al recibir, ¿verdad?, nueva guianza del CDC, ¿verdad?, el gobierno, estaremos renovando estos planes de acción. So, cada vez que recibamos nueva información, claro, ¿verdad?, se van a renovar esos planes de acción.
Let me ask a couple more questions. Will the ESSER grant help with smaller class sizes, hiring more teachers to help COVID disruptions?
I'm going to defer that to Mr. Garlick.
So, la pregunta es, ¿esos fondos federales van a ayudar en reducir la cantidad de estudiantes en una clase y también poder ocupar más maestros?
As far as the ESSER grant, it does provide funds to do tutorials and look at ways where we can try to reduce class sizes. A lot of that's going to be dependent upon the enrollment counts in the fall, as well as the availability of facilities.
So, los fondos sí permiten usar el dinero hacia pagar la tutoría y para también reducir la cantidad de estudiantes en una clase.
I'll ask one more question so we can honor everyone's time. But if students return to school next year, will parents be able to find out if their teachers have been vaccinated?
Well, there's no easy question or no easy answer to that. So when we talk about vaccines and vaccinations, you have to take into account a person's right to personal health information, and that's basically HIPAA. So if we ask an individual, we cannot mandate that employees get vaccinated as of right now. and we cannot ask employees. We can ask, but if an employee is, or any individual doesn't want to tell you, really, they don't have to, because that's protected health information. So we can't mandate it because right now the vaccine is under what's called an emergency authorization from the FDA. Now, once the FDA gives the vaccine its official seal of approval, then we can look at potentially taking those types of actions.
Esencialmente la pregunta es, como padre, voy a saber si el maestro o maestra de mi hijo, voy a poder tener esa información de que está vacunado o no vacunado. Y claro, ¿verdad? Ahorita la ley protege la confidencialidad de toda persona. Esa información no se puede compartir en ese momento.
Follow up to that question in Spanish. Are the kids going to be required to be vaccinated, not only staff?
La pregunta es, ¿les va a requerir a los estudiantes estar o ser vacunados?
That's going to be the same answer to the previous question. Once the CDC officially approves it through its vetting process, then we can, then we can mandate it the same way that we require other vaccinations in schools.
En ese momento no se puede requerir, ¿verdad? En el proceso donde se encuentran las vacunas, ya cuando reciben ese sello, ¿verdad? Del FDA, entonces, ¿verdad? Ya entra una nueva etapa en lo que se puede requerir de la población.
Okay, so with that, I am going to introduce Dr. Jocelyn Oakes. Dr. Oakes, come on up. Dr. Oakes is board certified in pediatric medicine. She's been practicing pediatric medicine for, I'm just going to say over 20 years. So she has a wide range of expertise and knowledge in this. So I will turn it over to Dr. Oakes. Thank you, Dr. Oakes, for joining us this afternoon.
So, doctora Oakes tiene más de 20 años de experiencia como pediatra y va a compartir parte de su conocimiento.
Yes, hi, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. My presentation is on COVID in kids from 0 to 18 years of age. And for those of you, for those of you who haven't attended any of my previous lectures, we have already gathered a year's worth of data on pediatric COVID since the pandemic started. And that data is largely reassuring in that for the vast majority of kids who get it, COVID is a mild illness. In fact, for young children, those less than 10 years of age, they seem less likely than adults to contract the illness when exposed, and when they do get it, they are also less likely to pass it around. So in children more than 10 years of age, transmission rates mimic that of adults. This type of pattern of transmission is in direct contrast to influenza, where studies from past flu epidemics show that the way the flu spreads in a community is through the grade school kids while in the school setting. Now, this piece of information was actually the basis for the original school closures last year at the beginning of the pandemic, because the original assumption was that the COVID was going to be spread in the same way. Now, this type of community transmission does not appear to be the case with COVID. What we found during the pandemic is that the adults are the main drivers of infection within the community. The data has been that when children get sick, they usually get it from their household or extended family. Of course, the older teenagers can get it the same way adults do if they have adult-like social habits. Like, for example, if your teenager has a car and he has a job, then he can get the COVID out there in the community just like any other adult. And I will elaborate on this, on my experience on transmission here in the Valley in particular a little bit later. So it is theorized that there are two factors that are in play in kids that cause them not to get so sick from coronavirus. Firstly, there is a receptor on the cells called ACE2, ACE2, that they don't have. So they do not have this receptor on their cells. The older or the sicker a person is, the more of these receptors they seem to have. And this is what the COVID virus spike protein attaches to, causing the kind of problems that you see in adults. Secondly, it appears that T helper immune response is protective in kids. In other words, children's immune response to this virus is very efficient, which is what it's supposed to do. So you get the virus, the child gets the virus, their immune system neutralizes it, and that's why they have minimal symptoms. That's why they don't catch it that easily, and they don't spread it either, because their immune system is so effective. And in direct contrast, in adults, the core problem in adults, but first of all, aside from the fact that they have more ACE2 receptors, is that their immune system overreacts. The closest that this comes to in kids is the entity called MISC. This stands for multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. What it is, it's a complication of COVID infection. It happens 2 to 4 weeks after your initial infection. It's similar to the bad case of COVID that you see in adults. Most kids who get it recover though. For our purposes, what you need to know about it is that it's rare. It's rare. It usually occurs in older children. The average age is about 11. So I wouldn't worry about the babies, the infants, the preschoolers, the grade schoolers. That's not the age group that gets the MISC. What you need to look for are symptoms 3 weeks after your child gets COVID, 2 to 4 weeks after your child gets COVID. You need to look for symptoms such as severe abdominal pain and high fever. So despite MISC though, despite the reports of MISC, the available data indicates that COVID-19 associated hospitalizations and death is uncommon in children across the board. In 43 states reporting in the United States, the death rate in kids is 0 to 0.03% of all pediatric COVID cases. And the 0 is because in some of the states reporting, there are no reported deaths from pediatric COVID. So it is truly rare that a child will succumb to this virus. So that in a nutshell is the data, is the information and the data that we have collected in the past year since the pandemic started for COVID in children. So what have I seen in my practice? Pretty much what the data says. So the transmission, in my experience, is by household or family contact. In other words, they're not getting it directly out there in the community. They don't get it at HEB. They don't get it at the mall. They don't get it going to the beach, going to the park. They're not even getting it from the schools. They're not getting it from the daycare either. In general, right? It's not absolute. You can get sick in these situations, but for the vast majority of them, they're getting it from household transmission. So the usual story goes something like this. The parent, the adult in the household will get it from work or out there in the community. Let's say they went to a gathering, maybe a funeral or some other gathering like that. The parent gets the illness and they unknowingly bring it into the household. And that is how the kids get it. The other scenario is if the family goes as a unit, let's say they'll go to Houston, right? The whole family goes to Houston. The whole family goes to a restaurant. The adult will get sick first. And then 2 days later, which is the incubation period, in my experience, because the CDC says it's 2 to 14 days, right? But clinically, what I see in the office is more like 2 to 5. So it's the right incubation period to pass on to the kids. And it's precisely because of this type of household transmission in children. That's why I think it's really important for parents to get the vaccine. Even if I think as a parent you don't want to get it for yourself for whatever reason, but it breaks this type of household transmission. So in a lot of ways, it really does protect your kids for you to get the vaccine. And so a word about the vaccine, right? They all work. It doesn't matter which one you pick. Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson and Johnson, they all work. The risk of side effect far outweigh the benefit. The other thing about the vaccine is that it's very effective. Once it rolled out in January, the graph for deaths and cases of COVID declined dramatically, and especially in Texas, but really all across the board. Okay, so back to COVID. So to me, in the patients that I see, COVID in kids looks just like a regular viral illness. For a child, catching the flu is worse because they look sicker and they are sicker for longer. With COVID, their symptoms are mild to moderate, and it usually lasts only 1 to 2 days, sometimes 3 to 4. They get sore throat, cold-like symptoms, abdominal pain, diarrhea, headache, body ache. The worst symptom I may have seen is high fever to 102 and bronchiolitis, but this is standard bronchiolitis that you give a parent a nebulizer and they'll take care of it. You don't need to hospitalize the child. I've conferred with 2 other local pediatricians here in West Laco about their experience, and they say the same thing as well. All of us, the 3 of us, have seen newborns with COVID, and they did fine. None, 0 of their high-risk patients, and so what we saw were asthmatics, seizure patients, heart disease. None of them ended up in the hospital. The one case of pediatric COVID that ended up in the hospital ended up there because of the dehydration from the diarrhea that he got. So between me and my colleagues locally, we have seen a few hundred patients with pediatric COVID. These range from 0 to 18 years of age, and all of them, 100%, had an uneventful recovery. I've consulted with an infectious disease specialist in kids about his experience. So he's talking about, he's seen COVID in asthmatics, leukemics, cancer patients, kidney, poor immune system, cerebral palsy, and this is what he says. Most of them will do fine. The number one risk factor for having a bad outcome here in the Valley in a child seems to be a patient who is obese, particularly if they're in their teenage years. The other category of high risk is a patient who has a poor cough reflex and who cannot cough adequately and remove secretions, like those with neuromuscular illnesses. And that's it. Everyone else seems to do fine. So for these 2 groups of patients, you should absolutely vaccinate them for their own protection. So to summarize what we've talked about so far, COVID is a mild illness in kids. MISC and death is rare. In kids less than 10, even if they catch it, they don't really spread it around. So this is precisely why the American Academy of Pediatrics takes a strong stance, urging parents to send their kids back to school for face-to-face learning. If we were all to do a risk-benefit analysis for a child, the benefit of sending them to school far outweigh the risk and the damages of getting COVID. First and foremost, the academic benefits. We already have data that show kids are falling behind academically. They are forgetting how to read. They are forgetting how to write. They're pretty much forgetting whatever they already previously learned. In some areas, up to 30% of kids are falling behind. 1 in 3. That's staggering. Second, the physical benefits. The rate of obesity in kids have increased across the board in the past year due to virtual learning. They are just getting too sedentary, being educated in this format. Third, the developmental benefits. What this means is that kids learn so much more than academics in the time that they spend in school. For an adult, to lose 1 year is not that big of a deal. But for a child, to lose 1 year of developmental opportunity has profound effects. Just think about when you were in grade school, whatever grade you were in, first grade, second grade, let's say first grade. Remember how you looked up to the second graders when you were a first grader, and you, at least for me, I thought they were bigger than me, they were smarter than me. And if you were in 8th grade middle school and then that 1 year going into freshman, they just seem more advanced, these kids ahead of you. So my point is, in the eyes of a child, 1 year makes such a big difference. And so, and that is what happened to them this year. They lost that year of developmental opportunity. So I feel their development, their learning, and their advancement has stalled. Fourth benefit of going back to school is the emotional and psychological. For the older kids, the teenagers, early in the pandemic, I was seeing a lot of signs of anxiety, and now it has changed over to depression and apathy. To be isolated from their peers for 1.5 years is just too long for them. They are losing their ability to cope at this point. The fifth benefit, safety and security. I hate to even bring this up, but ER visits from injury due to domestic violence went up this past year across the board. For some kids, it is just simply safer for them to be in school. So there are plenty of benefits to getting the kids back for all levels back into the classroom. In the spirit of trying to reassure the public, I'd just like to say that, at least from a medical point of view, I feel that we are winning. We are winning the war on COVID. With the vaccines now widely available, the number of cases, the number of deaths have gone down dramatically all across the U.S. In Texas, deaths have been going down. Deaths have been going down since January and has stayed down, despite the fact that we have not had a mask mandate over the last 2 months now. In my practice, the last wave of COVID patients I saw was in January. So whatever our herd immunity today is, it is way better than how we had it back in July, obviously. Between the people who had natural immunity and all those people now who are vaccinated, roughly 48% of Texans, whatever it is, it's still better than July. We know more about this virus, its transmission, the nature of the illness itself. With more COVID testing being widely available, we can diagnose cases faster, which translates to being able to treat the patient earlier in the course of their illness, and that in turn translates to better patient outcomes. We have more treatment options available, and there's also widespread public knowledge on how to mitigate risk. So in short, the Valley is in a better place now than what it was this time last year. It's time for us all to move forward and a little bit more. And the school is doing everything they can, so I think it's a good idea, personally, I think, to have the kids come back into school by the fall. So to end this lecture, I just want to say that I think the schools have done a good job keeping the kids safe. Bear in mind that we have not had a community outbreak in this setting. But I'd also like to remind parents and students that they need to do their part as well. I mean, sure, the school is doing a good job, but but we can't all put the burden of keeping everybody safe on the school. Parents need to monitor their kids and not even send them to school if they are ill in the morning. And students need to keep following safety guidelines while they are in school, whatever those guidelines might eventually be. I'm thinking in my head, whether everyone else is wearing a mask or not, you could always protect yourself by keeping your mask on and getting the vaccine if you qualify for it. These will give you adequate enough protection, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, it will take all of us in the community doing our own small part to make this all work and keep the pandemic under control here in the Valley. Thank you.
There is a question for emotional support and socializing among students. Will the ESSER fund be able to follow funds to give schools the ability to use for social activities for students, such as field day?
Can you restate that question again?
Yes.
The last part?
For emotional support and socializing among students, will the ESSER fund be able to allow funds to give schools the ability to use for social activities?
As a general rule, social activities will be an issue with federal funds. It'll depend on what exactly the activity is, but usually field trips, things like that, we cannot do that with federal funds.
Will students that are sent home continue with Zoom learning? Students that are sent home because they have COVID?
At this time, I do not know what process we're going to follow in the fall if we have any students with COVID. I know that right now the numbers are very small, and we'll probably have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Una de las preguntas era, ¿se pueden usar esos fondos con el propósito de la ayuda emocional o social más bien? Y todo depende en cuál va a ser esa actividad, pero el gobierno federal, ¿verdad? No que no estén enfocados en eso, pero puede haber un poco más de problema en actividades sociales en comparación a otras actividades académicas.
Parents, if for some reason we did not get to answer your question in the chat, you can always submit your question at the parent helpline located on our WISD website.
Si no contestamos su pregunta o tiene otro comentario, puede, ¿verdad?, ir al sitio que está apuntado aquí en la pantalla para poder, ¿verdad?, dar sus pensamientos o hacer su pregunta y con todo gozo les vamos a contestar.
Is there any questions here?
¿Preguntas?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you mind coming here to the microphone so that they can hear you? Thank you.
There's a microphone in the middle.
We have these air filtrations here that we're not allowed.
Well, I just wanted to say that this was very informative. I feel a lot better now with Dr. Oaks presenting this in a medical perspective. And I'm glad to see the kids going back to school in the fall. So just wanted to, hats off to you all, did a good job.
Thank you so much for your comment, ma'am. And that concludes our meeting for this evening. I want to thank all of you. Oh, I'm sorry. One more question. No,
So,
go
su
ahead.
comentario simplemente era que está agradecida, ¿verdad?, con la presentación esta noche y ella se siente aún más en paz, ¿verdad?, con los planes moviendo hacia adelante. Ms. Martinez?
Yes, my question is, are you all going to continue with the iStation, Education Galaxy during the summer? Those programs that are used throughout
The online programs?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the principals and with their summer learning loss, they can still continue to work with those programs. And then during summer school, we will continue to use the assets that we have, which would include those programs.
Okay, thank you.
And that concludes our meeting for this evening. I want to thank everyone who joined us here face to face, and for those that joined us from home, everyone have a blessed night. Thank you.
Concluyamos esta junta. Les agradecemos que estuvieron con nosotros aquí en persona y también aquellos virtualmente. So, tengan una noche en paz y bendecidos.